Okay, we're only 2 minutes late. I think we're gonna get started here in the Whatcom Family Farmers Room. So if you are attending, please make your way in. So our first speaker is Munashe Makonya, and he's going to talk to us about assessment of physiological responses, fruit yield, and quality in red raspberry under different heat mitigation treatments. Thanks, Munashe.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, this is not.
I think that's fine. Should be okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking to you about an assessment of physiological responses, fruit yield, and quality in red raspberry under different heat mitigation treatments. So just as an introduction, raspberry is an economically important crop with a twofold increase in production in the past 10 years. But extreme weather, for example, heat in this case, are on the increase. And this is going to be affecting, or it's already affecting our growers as well as food security in general. But raspberry in the Pacific Northwest is traditionally acclimated to mild and maritime climates. But the reality of heat stress is something that we can't really ignore. I will give an example of the heat dome in 2021, where days where the temperatures were as high as 117 degrees Fahrenheit, and some of our growers lost 30 to 40% of their crop, and in some instances, total crop loss. And this was estimated to have resulted in about 20 million loss in revenue, and of course, having negative downstream effects on local economies. And this was mainly due to the damage that was observed on the leaves, affecting production in the current year, and potentially affecting production in the coming years. And from consultations that we've had with our extension community, we've been told there has been a reoccurrence. Some of our growers have already, seen effects of heat stress on their crop this year. So this is something that we can't ignore. It's a real challenge. So we then get to wonder if our industry is prepared to deal with these extremes in heat. So that's where some of these heat mitigation technologies come into play. For example, evaporative cooling and shade net. So for the evaporative cooling, basically what happens is we have these micro sprinklers that spray jets of moisture on the canopy. So as the water evaporates from that canopy, it takes the heat with, cooling down that microenvironment and helping the plants to be able to photosynthesize efficiently and potentially improving their yields. And this is a system that has been tested by our colleagues from USDA and Oregon State University, where they reported that about 20-minute cycles for blueberries are effective in mitigating heat stress, improving yields for blueberries as well. So the other technology is the use of shade net. And with shade net, we're blocking direct UV, reducing the temperature again in that microenvironment, improving the conditions for photosynthetic efficiency for the plants that are within that environment, improving soil moisture uptake as well. So these are systems that have been tested in other, rather technologies that have been tested in other cropping systems. Not much has been done, in raspberry systems. So we have then thought of putting together a study where our objectives were the first one to examine the physiological and genetic mechanisms that contribute to heat tolerance across cultivars in advanced selections of raspberry. The second one being to evaluate the impacts and cost benefits of heat mitigation technologies across several cultivars and promising selections of raspberry, of course, using these two technologies that I've just discussed. And the third one being to effectively disseminate our project findings to our growers for potential crop improvement, as well as also potential improved crop cultivation practices. So for us to be able to answer these objectives, we set up a field study in Northeast Washington in Prosa. So Prosa is a dry place. They've got dry summers and they're hot and cool winters. And this study was planted in the spring of 2023 on a split plot experimental design, replicated 4 times, and we had 11 plants in each split plot. And the main plot, which is the treatments, included the evaporative cooling, the shade net, and the control, which was not treated. And we had the split plot, which was made up of the genotypes that we worked with, Maker and Wakefield, some of our industry standards, WSU and ORAS, which are Washington State University and Oregon State University advanced breeding lines. So the micro sprinklers that we use operated at a pressure of 35 psi, and they were applied approximately 15 gallons of water per micro sprinkler per hour. And they were actuated at air temperatures that were equal to or greater than 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And they were stopped around between 7 and 9 p.m., depending on the prevailing conditions. And the shade cloak that we used had a 40% photosynthetically active radiation protection capacity. So the first figure that I'm going to share with you here is of the fruit surface and air temperature. So basically what we did is we put thermocouples just beneath the epidermal layer of the fruits in the different fruits on plants that were grown in these different treatments. So the first result that I want to draw your attention to is the black line, which is the air temperature. So this was the air temperature that was recorded in real time during a heat stress event from the 6th to the 14th of July this year. So on the y-axis, you can see the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit, and on the x-axis, these are the different days when the data was collected. So if you look at I don't know if it's orange, yeah, the orange line, that's for the fruit on plants that were grown under control conditions. You can see this line has the biggest amplitude displacement as far as the fruit temperature is concerned in relation to the reference air temperature. And this just shows you how elevated the fruit temperature was in these fruits from plants that were grown under control conditions. And if you then move to the green line, there's not much of a difference between the reference temperature and that of the fruits that were recorded under shade cloth, to show you how much the system was effective in controlling or at least minimizing that elevation in the fruit temperature for the crop that was within the shade cloth. And then the final one, the evaporative cooling line. If you look at the first 4 days, you can see that it's spiked up as high as maybe the control. And this is because during that period, we had water switched off by the irrigation district. So it was as good as there was no evaporative cooling that was happening. So this I'm mentioning so we are aware that if anyone were to try to, adopt the evaporative cooling, we need to have a consistent and continuous irrigation water supply. But then once watering, or rather the water supply was restored, you can see, it goes way down to the same, probably the same level as the shade cloth from around day 10 up to day 14. And then for the yield and fruit quality, on the y-axis, we have the yield in pounds per plant, and on the x-axis, we have the different treatments. So the shade cloth and evaporative cooling significantly resulted in significantly higher, fruit yield in comparison to the control. Actually, it was 121% more than plants that were grown under control conditions. This basically shows how effective, again, our heat mitigation systems or technologies were in improving crop yield. And then the pictures underneath the figure are representative of what we observed 2 weeks after harvesting the fruit. There was much of a pathogenic infection for fruit harvested from plants that were grown under evaporative cooling systems. And so again, this is something that one needs to pay attention to. If they were to adopt evaporative cooling systems, there is a potential reduction in shelf life. And this is especially so for people that are interested in fresh markets. And the next figure here is net CO2 assimilation, photosynthetic efficiency of the plants. And consistent again with the yield, significantly higher net CO2 for plants grown under shade and evaporative cooling in comparison to the plants that were grown under control conditions. That's from June and July. And in August, we actually had plants that were grown under shade significantly photosynthesizing better in comparison to the ones that were grown under evaporative cooling and those that were grown under control conditions. And the stem water potential, plants that were grown under control conditions had significantly lower stem water potential. They were strained a lot more. So and those that were grown under shade cloth had significantly higher stem water potential under stress, and this exhibits better adaptation and recovery to both heat stressful conditions as well as moisture stress. So the conclusions from this study are that the yield, photosynthetic performance, stem water potential data demonstrates that shade cloth and evaporative cooling systems do mitigate heat stress. And we do have some genotype and genotype by treatment interactions. And I know from this talk, I didn't share with you any data that shows the genotypic differences. But this is something that we've seen differences genotypically as far as these different treatments are concerned. And this is data that we are going to be sharing with you in due course. And evaporative cooling systems caused a noticeable increase in post-harvest disease in the Oris genotype. Again, this is data that I showed you earlier on. And data collection, of course, is going to continue in 2025. And cost benefits and adoption surveys are ongoing to inform adoption and outreach strategies. And a couple of my colleagues are going to come onto the stage after me, and then they'll share more about that. And if one is to consider any of these heat mitigation technologies, there's a couple of things they need to put into consideration. For starters, the shade cloth has a couple of pros. It has a dual function. It can also work as a hail protector. It is the most effective at mitigating physiological indicators of heat and water stress, and it also reduces UV damage. But the cons then are that it is expensive to install, costing about $5,600 to $10,000 per acre, plus labor and maintenance. And wind events also necessitate repairs, leading, of course, to higher maintenance costs. And it may interfere with machine harvesting and other equipment operations, and it may delay ripening and impact the quality of our fruit. And then for the evaporative cooling system, the pros are it does cool, it provides some protection, generally cheaper in comparison to the shade, costing about $4,200 to $4,800 per acre, plus labor. Also can be used for chemical application. And the cons are that access to quality irrigation water may be limiting in some areas. This is something that we also experienced in process this year. So something to keep in mind if you were to adopt evaporative cooling systems. But it may also increase fruit and storage rot, decreasing shelf life. And this is especially important if you are targeting the fresh market. And there is increased weed pressure, because obviously when you're putting the micro sprinklers, it's almost a continuous application of water, and resulting in more availability of water for the growing weeds. And we acknowledge WSDA for funding. And Beat the Heat website there is our website for our program, where you can see some of the material that we have put together in regards to heat mitigation. And of course, I acknowledge a couple of people written there, and then my lab, Small Fruit Lab. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Munashe. Does anyone have any questions while we still have Munashe? I'm going to come to you first.
Were there any fungicide applications made specifically for like the evaporative cooling?
No.
Okay.
Your cycle, so you were 20 minutes on and 20 minutes off?
No.
No. Or
okay. So, I think thank you for bringing that up. So the 20-minute on, 20-minute off is from the recommendations that were made in the blueberry system in Oregon. So what we did in our case was we switched the system on when the temperatures be at 86 Fahrenheit and more, turn on. If it were to drop down, switch off. So it was a continuous system. It's using up more water, but basically what we wanted to do first was to see if the system was going to be effective enough in raspberry systems. And then going forward, we'll then try to play around with alternating different times to see if we can save up on the water.
Awesome. Any other questions for Munashe? All right, thank you so much. Awesome. Okay, so our next talk is a little bit different. It's going to involve these clickers that you're being handed. So make sure you have one to interact with the survey. We're just going to get things set up for the survey with the clickers. Thank you for your patience. Awesome. Thank you so much for waiting. So now I'm going to introduce Karina Gallardo, and she's going to talk to you about your perspectives about heat mitigation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Please note that we are going to participate in a raffle. You have the clickers in your hands. There are numbers behind the clickers, and there are going to be 3 winners that is going to get a $50 gift card from a really nice store in the area. So please stay and please give us your thoughts about heat mitigation technologies. So this is the IRB protocol that is mandated by the university. We have to make sure that you know that we are doing this study. We're asking these questions, hopefully not to create an inconvenience, but we want to get your perception so we can get more focused research and perhaps facilitate our outreach. Please know that this information is going to be confidential. We're not going to know the name of the person who is responding or the name of the company. Only aggregate results will be made public. And if you have any questions about this, you can contact myself or IRB at WSU. So the first question you have the clickers is like, do you agree to participate in this study? So you press 1 if yes, and press 2 if no. Awesome. So while we wait to everybody to respond, we should have about 30 people in the room. Yes? Okay, so I'm gonna go and close the poll. Oh, we have more. Okay. Well, I'm gonna go next, 33. Okay, I'm gonna close the poll and I'm going to go to the next. So after, as I mentioned, after you respond these questions, you will participate in a raffle. It will be 3 winners, each with a $50 gift card from the Tractor Supply Company. So the first thing is to get to know your perspectives about risk. In the next slide, you're going to look at 10 scenarios. Each scenario contains 2 offers, A and B. Each offer or option represents a payoff. A is 100% guarantee you will get that money. B has some chances, 70% chance, not 100% guarantee. We're interested to know at what point you prefer the for sure quantity in your hand rather than the 70% chance of getting a quantity. And here's an example. So you have here option A, you have $600 per acre for sure. And option B, 30% of getting 0 and 70% of getting 6,000, 70% of 6,000. So if you say, I think I prefer B, then you go to the next one. Now, what about 1,200? You prefer 1,200 for sure, or 70% of getting 6,000? If you still prefer B, then you go to the third one. Now it's 1,800. You prefer 1,800 for sure, or 70% of getting 6,000. If you still say I prefer the 70%, then you go to the next one. So the exercise is at what point you say, no, I stay with this amount for sure, I don't care about the 6,000, the 70% chances, I start with this amount for sure. So in this example, for example, me, I say, well, I would prefer 3,000 for sure, rather than getting the 70% dollar chance of 6,000. So because I say 3,000, that is number 5. That row corresponds to the number 5. So what you will do is to press number 5 in the clicker. Is that understood? Yeah, more or less, okay. So at the point where you are sure that you want the for sure quantity is where you press that amount, okay? You press that amount. So if it's understood, no questions, let's play. What amount of dollars you prefer for sure over a 70% chance of getting $6,000 per acre? Press 1 if you prefer 600 for sure, 2 if you prefer 1,200, 3 if you prefer 1,800, 4, 2,400, 5, 3,000, 6, 3,600, 7, 4,200, 8, 4,800, 9, 5,400, or 10, the 6,000. Okay. We have 31 responses, 31, 32, 33. Wait for, okay, I think 35. 35, we close the poll. Here's our distribution. We close the poll and we go to the next one. Now, we have heard Munashe talking about the heat events, right? What happened in 2021, where some people lost about 30% of their yields, some other people lost everything. And this project, Beat the Heat, who is investigating in technologies that could mitigate those losses. But as Munashe expressed, these technologies have pros and cons. I think the major con is you have to invest in shade netting, that it is not cheap. You have to invest in micro sprinklers, that it is less costly, but it still represents an investment, right? But that is if there is a heat event or not. So based on that, based on Munashe's presentation, question is, what is the maximum profit? And when I say profit, please consider the revenues, your expected yields, the amount of fruit you're going to be able to sell, minus what you're going to be spending or investing in these technologies, revenues minus costs. What is that amount of profit you will expect to receive if you decide to actually investigate in these heat mitigation technologies? But assume that for some reason you have a crystal ball and you know it is 100% sure you will have a heat event next year. Press 1 if it's 600, 2 if it's 1,200, 3 if it's 1,800, 4 if it's 2,400, 5, 3,000, 6, 3,600, 7, 4,200, 8, 4,800, 9, 5,400, and 10 if you expect to receive 6,000. I have 27, 31, 31 responses, 32, 33 responses. Okay, we close the poll. One more. There you go. Next question. Now, this is the same question, but it is only 50% chances that there will be a heat event next year. How much you will expect to receive if you invest in these technologies? What is your expectation? It's only 50% chances a heat event will happen next year. And it's the same, 1, 600, 2, 1,200, 3, 1,800, and so on until 10. 10, by the way, is the 0 in the clicker, 6,000. So counting 3, 2, 1, we have 33 responses, 34 responses. Close the poll and go to the next question. Now, did you or your operation use shade netting for heat stress mitigation in 2024 or before? Press 1 if yes, press 2 if no, Press 3 if not applicable. We have 29, 30, 31, 3 more. Okay, with 32, 33 responses. 3, 2, 1, close the poll. Next question. What is the most important reasons you did not use shed netting or you think shed netting is not a good idea for heat stress mitigation? 1, too costly. 2, potential negative unintended consequences like growth of weeds. Press 3 if its expected benefits of crop protections are not financially worth it. You're not convinced about that. 4, very unlikely an extreme heat event will happen in the next 5 years, at least once in the next 5 years. 5, could make field operations difficult, like machine harvest. Press 6 if you plan to exit the industry. Please 7 if it's not applicable. You did use shade netting for heat stress mitigation. Okay, we have 30 responses, 33 responses. Okay, we close the poll, go to the next question. So if you say that you did not use shade netting, what are the chances you will invest in shade netting within the next 5 years? Press 1 if it's in between 0 to 10% chances, 2 if it's 10 to 20, 3 if it's 20 to 30, 4, 30 to 40, and so on until the 0 that it is 90 to 100% convinced that shade netting is the way to go. $26, $27. We need to get to the 33 number. If you already are using shade netting, then press 0. $29, $30, $31, $32. Okay, close the poll at 31. Next question. What about micro sprinklers? Did you or your operation use micro sprinklers for heat stress mitigation? For heat stress mitigation in 2024 or before? Press 1 if yes, 2 if no, 3 if not applicable. For heat stress mitigation. We have 26, 27, 28. Need to get up to 33, 34 responses to close the poll. 30. Any more? Okay, we close at 30. Next question is, what is the most important reason you think micro sprinklers is not a good idea for heat stress mitigation? Is it number 1, if it's too costly? 2, of the negative unintended consequences like increased weed and disease pressure? 3, expected benefits of the crop protection will not be financially worth it? 4, very unlikely an extreme heat event will happen in the next 5 years. 5, access to water is a limitation for micro sprinklers use. 6, if you plan to exit the industry. 7, if it's not applicable, you actually use micro sprinklers for heat stress mitigation. We have 31 responses, 32, 33, 33, we close the poll. Next question. What are the chances if you did not use the micro sprinklers, what are the chances that you will actually invest in micro sprinklers? 1, if it's 0 to 10, 2, if it's 10 to 20, 3, 20 to 30, 4, 30 to 40. And if you use, it's 100, no, it's number 0. And this is micro sprinklers for heat mitigation, heat stress mitigation. We have 32 responses. We close with 32 responses. Next question, what about biostimulants? Biostimulants, I believe it was not mentioned in the previous presentation, but these are chemicals that are put into the fertigation system in order to protect the plant from heat stress. So one, if you use biostimulants, two, if you didn't use biostimulants, three, if not applicable. So we have 29, 30 responses. Close with 30. 30 responses. Okay, no more. Close the poll. Next question. What is the most important reason you will not think biostimulants for heat stress mitigation is a good reason? One, too costly. Two, negative potential unintended consequences. Three, unproven regarding their efficacy for heat stress mitigation. You're not convinced this will be protecting your crops. Four, expected benefits of crop protection are not financially worth it. Five, very unlikely a heat stream will happen in the next 5 years. Six, plan to exit the industry. Seven, not applicable. I actually use biostimulants for heat stress mitigation. We have 26 responses. We close with 32 or 30. Okay, 31, 32. Okay, close with 32. Next question, what are the chances you would like actually be convinced to apply biostimulants in the next season if you didn't use before? 0, 1, press number 1 if it's 0 to 10, 2 if it's 10 to 20, and so on and so forth until the 0 that it is for sure I will use biostimulants. We have 30 responses, 31, 32. Close the poll with 32 responses. Now, this one does not imply a response, is based, this small estimation is preliminary, is based on the preliminary data from Munashe and from Lisa DeVetter's lab on what were the effects of the shade netting at the micro sprinkler. We actually crunched the numbers into Munashe's results, and we did this analysis. What are your profits or your net returns in the presence of the heat event compared to in the presence of no heat event? So no heat event, your yields are going to be, and this is applicable to Washington raspberry operation. Yield about 9,600 pounds per acre, right? Total returns, considering a price of $2.4 per pound, about $23,000 per acre. Now the cost, variable cost estimated at 11,500. Fixed costs, those fixed costs are the ones that do not depend on the volume of production. They are there whether you produce or not. You invested on those and they are going to be there whether you produce or not, whether your yields are high or low. Heat event, in the presence of no heat event, fixed costs, 5,800. Now, if you do shade netting, your fixed costs are going to increase. Munashe said that the shade netting costs about $10,000. The material plus the labor installation, annualize that cost and convert it into a per acre basis, your fixed cost will increase from 5,800 to about 8,800, right? Now, micro sprinklers also need an investment. They cost about $5,000, $6,000 per acre. Annualize this, it's about, your fixed cost will go up from 5,800 to 6,300, okay? And biostimulant, we don't vary the variable or the fixed cost because we will only apply in case of a heat event. You don't apply if there is no heat event. So here the costs are keep the same as in the do nothing. So your net returns are going to vary. In the no heat event, you're going to be getting less money in the case of the shade netting and the micro sprinkler because of the investment you made in the shade netting and the micro sprinkler, right? We agree on that. But what happens if there is a heat event? We're considering the 30% losses in yield, okay? So the do nothing, instead of getting 9,600 pounds per acre, we're gonna get 6,700. And that is going to affect my total returns, considering the same price, the 2.4, it's not going to be 23,000, it's going to be 16,000. And then my shade netting, the yields, according to feedback from Munashe and from Lisa, my yields because they are not going to be affected that much. So we kept them constant, net total returns constant for shade netting and micro sprinklers. And the biostimulant, according to Lisa, it's about not the 30% loss, not the 100% protection. So it's going to be a 15% loss. So that is going to decrease my yields from 9,600 to 8,000 and my returns from 23,000 to 19,000. So here in the do nothing, variable and fixed costs are the same. In the shade netting, here variable costs are affected too because the shade netting implies operational costs. You have to deploy the netting and that means labor that it has to do that. So variable costs are affected, they are higher. And obviously the fixed costs are higher, we knew that. Micro sprinklers, the variable costs are higher as well because you need labor actually to be working with the micro sprinklers and your fixed costs are higher, we knew that. And the biostimulants variable costs actually are going to be affected, they're going to be higher because they cost about $15.99 per pound and you need to apply a number of times during the season through fertigation, so no labor, but the cost of the material is what it is affecting the variable cost, no investment in fixed costs. So how this is going to change your net returns, where actually if you lose 30% of your yields, you're not going to be receiving 5,600, you're actually be losing 1,200. If you have the shade netting and your yields are protected, but you invested in the netting, you're going to be making about 2,400. Please note that I didn't include other benefits of the shade netting, like the sunburn or protection towards birds or other effects. I didn't include all the potential consequences of shade netting. I didn't include also the micro sprinklers or the potential consequences of micro sprinklers. So just considering the losses in yield from sunburn. So this is how the net returns are going to be affected, right? So net returns for shade netting, in the case of a heat event, it will be 2,400. For macro sprinklers, in the case of a heat event, will be 4,700. And for biostimulants, 2,026. So the difference with the do nothing scenario actually for the shade netting is about 3,700. For the micro sprinklers, about 6,000. And from the biostimulant, is about 3,200, right? And obviously, this depends on that price, right? On the 2.4. If the price is, if that price gets to be lower, then you probably are going to be better off with the biostimulant. If the price gets to be higher, then it's not good. The biostimulant is not going to be that favorable, right? So it all depends on the price. We are assuming a fixed price of 2.4. Having known that information, I ask you again, what is the maximum profit you expect to receive from using heat stress mitigation technologies in case you are absolutely sure that a heat event will happen? Press 1 if it's 600, 2 if it's 1,200, 3 is 1,800, 4 is if 2,400, 5, 3,000, and so on until 0, $6,000 per acre. We have 19 responses. "31 responses. Now this close the poll. Next question, same question, but now it's only 50% chances a heat event will happen. What is the maximum amount you will expect to receive from investing in these heat mitigation technologies? What is your expectation in terms of yield losses, protection to your crop, and the amount you will invest?" We have 20 responses. "27, close at 30, 29, 30. "31. Okay, we close the poll. Next question. Now, what is your opinion? What are the chances that there will be a heat event at least once in the next 5 years? Press 1 if it's 0 to 10%, 2 if you think it's 10, 20% chances, 3 if it's 20 to 30, so on and so forth until 0, 90 to 100 chances there will be a heat event at least once in the next 5 years. What do you guys think? Do you think it's gonna happen again? 31, 32, 32 responses. Okay, 33. Close the poll. Next question. And now these are questions about your operation. This is gonna help us understand, you know, what are the operations that are responding to this survey. So what mix of crops do you grow? If it's blueberries only, press 1. 2, if it's red raspberries only. 3, blackberries only. 4, a mix of berries. 5, berries and other crops. 6, other. 7, I don't grow any crops. We have 34 responses, closing the poll. Next question, what year you were born? Press number 1 if it's in or after 2000. 2 if it's 99 to 90. 3, 89 to 80. 4, 79 to 70. 5, 69 to 60. 6, 59 to 50. And 7, in or before 49. 34 responses, thank you so much. How many years have you been involved in making decisions in the raspberry operation? Press 1 if it's 1 to 5 years, 2 if it's 6 to 10, 3 if it's 11 to 15, 4 if it's 16 to 20, 5 if it's more than 20 years, and 6 if it's not applicable. You're either not a raspberry grower or not in the raspberry business. 31 responses. Close the poll. Next question, what is the highest level of schooling you have attained? Press 1 if it's high school, 2 if it's a 2-year associate, 3 if it's a 4-year bachelor degree, 4 more than a 4-year bachelor. $28, close poll at 28. What is your role in the small fruit industry? Only the most relevant in case you have more than one role. 1, if you're the owner or co-owner of the operation. 2, if you're a leasee. 3, if you're a hire manager. 4, if you're a chemical consultant. 5, if you're a packing house consultant. 6, a marketer. 7, other. 29, 30 responses. Close at 31. What percentage of your total household income comes from your raspberry operation? 1, if it's 1 to 24, 2, if it's 25 to 50, 3, if it's 50 to 75, 4, 75 to 100, 5, if it's 100, 6, not applicable, not a farmer, not in the raspberry business. Have 31, 32, closing the poll. What is the size of your raspberry operation in acres? 1, if it's less than 25, 2, 25 to 50, 3, 51 to 100, 4, 100 to 250, 5, 250 to 500, 6, 500 to 1,000, 7, more than 1,000, 8, not applicable, not a grower, not in the raspberry business. 31, 34 responses. Thank you. And finally, last question. Where is your raspberry farm located? Is it in British Columbia? Press number 1. Northwest Washington, Skagit and Whatcom. Number 2. 3, Northwest Oregon. 4, other. 5, not applicable. Not raspberry business, not grower. 32, 33. 33. Okay, we close this and I really appreciate your help. If you have any comments about this survey, please respond to that little QR code. And now we're going to proceed to the raffle for the 3 winners. I'm going to ask somebody to pick up. Have 127? No. Oh, yeah. Did you get one?
Right?
Oh, there, 70. Do we have 70? 70. No? A ver. Okay. 49. 49.
4-9. Anybody? I don't know if they did them sequentially. Three. You got lucky fingers. What's the highest number we have? 2. They said 42. 37? 37. Going once? Going twice? Oh, we got it. 37. Sounded like we have up to 42 out. So you're doing your best. Two? Number 2. Oh, he left. Number 2. We got it. Oh, well done, everyone. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for your feedback. I know how valuable it is in this situation. We really appreciate it. I'm just going to pull up. Oh, I won't. I'm not going to use Zoom.
Okay. Say. Okay. I didn't save. Sorry for that. And close. Wait. Something happened. It froze. Oh, save. Thank you, Lisa. Close. Yeah. There you go. There you go. Thank you. Sorry.
Awesome. No problem. That down. Okay. I'm gonna get this off again.
Good.
Awesome. Okay. And for our final talk over here in the Whatcom Family Farmers Room, we have Lisa DeVetter again with a raspberry nutrient management update, calcium fertilization, and leaf tissue standards. Thank you so much, Lisa.
All right. Thanks, Betsy. Wasn't that anticipation like exciting? Just what we needed this afternoon, 71, 16. So, but thanks to Karina, Suzette, and everyone for doing that raffle. So, and we also appreciate your input that you provided as well. It really helps provide us some direction and insights in terms of what you guys are thinking when we do this research with regards to heat mitigation. But now who's ready to hear about calcium and nutrient management? All right, I like that survey. I got the answer I need. Let's begin. So I'm going to talk about nutrient management in raspberries, and I'm going to be focusing specifically on calcium fertilization, what we've learned over the past few years when it comes to calcium nutrient uptake in raspberry fruits, as well as fertilizer trials, and then where we're at with developing Washington relevant, or I would say Pacific Northwest relevant leaf tissue nutrient standards for the cultivars that we're growing here in the Pacific Northwest. Just like any good project, it's a team effort. So we've got Dr. David Bryla and his technician Scott Orr helping out with this project and doing similar work in Blackberry and Oregon. Michael Hardigan, a breeder, is also involved. He's at the USDA RS with Dr. Bryla. Brian Malp and also technician in my program, and many other people you'll see acknowledged contributed to the work that I'm going to be presenting on. So let's just first start at the foundation. I always like to kind of cover the basics. So nutrient management is really important for productive raspberry plantings. We need to make sure that our plants are getting adequate nutrition, and having a good, effective nutrient management program is cornerstone to that. And I think I know a lot of you already realize more fertilizer doesn't necessarily mean better productivity. Everything's about a balancing act and understanding what's happening in a field by field basis with the specific cultivars that you are growing. That being said, there's a lot of knowledge gaps that we're trying to address through research. And this particular presentation is going to again focus on calcium, which is more or less kind of a complete project, although I still have a lot of questions that I'd like to probe into a little bit further later on, maybe next year. And then developing Washington-specific tissue nutrient standards. So that's one that we just started this year, and I have some data hot off the press that was cooking along with Thanksgiving dinner as I was analyzing the data. You might notice we have a new nutrient management for raspberries and blackberries in Oregon and Washington guideline. This was produced by several of the investigators I mentioned earlier, as well as Bernadine Strick, Amanda Davis, Scott Lucas, and several others. So this is a more updated guide for you to look at, but we'll likely be updating this guide as we generate more information, such as the information in the project I'll be presenting on this afternoon. So we're going to start with calcium. Calcium is just a fascinating nutrient. I think of it as the nutrient that's really associated with fruit quality. It's important for stabilizing and providing cell wall strength and membrane stability, which is really important when we think about not just fruit quality for fresh market and consumption right off the plant, but also how well that fruit is going to store. And then in our processing industry, we're trying to learn what role calcium might have in keeping berries intact and together when they run through an IQF line. We know with a lot of fruit crops, raspberries, blueberries, tree fruits, that calcium deficiencies in the fruit are very common because the fruit is a low transpiring tissue. And so during fruit development, there's times where we're just really struggling to get calcium and other nutrients into that fruit during development. And we try to supplement that with like foliar fertilizers as an example. And then calcium is also pretty interesting in the sense that there's other nutrients that can kind of act antagonistically in the soil and interfere with its uptake in the soil. So that's a little bit of background about calcium. Several years ago, I had a visiting PhD student, Alexander Diaz de Silva. He was fantastic. And we did a project with funding from the Washington Red Raspberry Commission where we looked at when is raspberry taking up calcium in the fruit? And we did this work with Wakefield, Meeker, as well as Wake Haven here in Whatcom County. And we collected fruit all the way through stages S1 through S7. What we found out is that the peak period of uptake was between stages S4 and S6. So that's the immature green and white fruit stage respectively. And if you notice over here, let me see if I can get the cursor going. Nope, I'm not a Mac person, so I'm not going to fiddle around with that anymore. But what we noticed is that the uptake curve in Meeker was much higher relative to, say, Wakefield or Wake Haven, for example. And then we saw a decline in calcium at the S7 or ripe berry stage, and we attributed that due to the loss of the receptacle. And that's something pretty interesting to kind of take note of, and I'll touch back on that later on when I talk about our fertilizer trials. But this was really important. It told us, okay, this is when raspberry is taking up calcium in the fruit, and we can be more targeted with our foliar fertilizer applications and try to target that window. So that led to the next question. Can we increase calcium concentration in raspberry fruits? And if so, do we see an impact on yield and different parameters of fruit quality? So we did this work again up here in Northwestern Washington. We had a fantastic grower cooperator. We applied soil applied as well as foliar treatments of calcium to Meeker in 2023 and 2024. And then in 2023, we also utilized Wake Haven. There was some field turnover, so that Wake Haven field wasn't available in 2024. So we got to work with Colshan, which was maybe one of the highlights. That was a really fun variety to work with. The trial was a randomized complete block design. You can kind of see what that looks like if you're curious. Our individual plots were 56 feet long, and each cultivar with those plots had them replicated 4 times. So we had 12 plots per cultivar. So I'd say pretty rigorous design for us as we were asking these questions about calcium fertilizer. And we measured yield, we measured fruit quality, including firmness, and we looked at nutrient concentrations in the fruit, in the soil, as well as in the primocane leaf tissue. So what products did we use? We looked at soil applied product. We looked at gypsum. In particular, we looked at Gypro, which is 22% calcium. Our rates varied over the 2 years. We had 1 ton per acre that we applied in 2023, and then we applied 1.5 ton per acre in 2024, done in March of the year that we conducted the trial, with the idea that hopefully we would have some time to kind of get that calcium down into the root zone. And then our foliar calcium treatment, we used a product available through CHS, the NuCal, which is 8% calcium from calcium hydroxide plus a non-ionic surfactant. And that was applied 8 times in 2023 and 7 times in 2024, trying to target that stage where we are seeing calcium uptake in the fruits based on the previous trial. So what did we learn? Well, it wasn't that exciting, to be quite honest. So still hear me out. So let's look at total yield. So we're looking at total yield for Wake Haven and Colshan for our different treatments. This is total yield in each year for our different treatments. So yield is in pounds per plant. We have our control, which is untreated, our foliar calcium, and our gypsum. There was no statistical effect for both of these 2 cultivars. What about Meeker? We had 2 years in Meeker. Maybe these effects are additive over time. Nope, we didn't see any effect with Meeker as well. So we had no effects due to any of our calcium fertilizer treatments when it comes to yield in all of the cultivars that we evaluated. Well, what about leaf primocane calcium content? So we measured calcium content in the primocane leaves, thinking, well, maybe we were successful in getting calcium into the leaves. Again, we didn't see any treatment effects for leaf calcium concentrations across the different cultivars. I'm not showing Meeker data here because it just, again, wasn't very exciting. We saw a year effect, so calcium concentration varied by year, but no treatment effect. But concentrations were within the sufficiency levels published by Oregon State University. And that's represented in the green box that you can see here. So this is where it starts to get interesting, though. We looked at calcium concentrations in both the fruit and the receptacle tissue. So if you're unfamiliar, here's the fruit in the top corner, and then here is the receptacle. Again, we saw no treatment effects on the fruit calcium concentrations, but in the receptacle, we saw, number one, significantly higher levels of calcium in the receptacle relative to the actual fruit tissue. And in Wake Haven, we did see a treatment effect where foliar treated plots had higher calcium content in the receptacle, and then gypsum had the second highest calcium concentration in the receptacle, and then the untreated control had the lowest concentration of calcium in the receptacle. Let's look at this data in a different way too. So here what we're looking at is the fruit calcium concentration on the y-axis, and this figure on the right is the receptacle calcium concentration. We have our 3 different cultivars, Wake Haven, Colshan, and Meeker, and then our different treatments. And again, we saw an effect in Wake Haven. We didn't see a treatment effect in the receptacle for the other cultivars, but the key thing is, again, look how different the percentage of calcium is on these different tissues. The receptacles on average had about 165% more calcium than the fruits. And so thinking about this and kind of cross-referencing this with other fruits, what I think is happening is that during development of the fruit, there is constriction in the xylem that in the receptacle that moves calcium to the fruits. And that restriction is leading to an isolation event and making it really difficult to get calcium into the fruit during the fruit development period. Doesn't mean we can't get it in there. I think the next step would be to start looking at calcium applications with some PGRs that might try to help maintain the xylem functionality longer, so we have a longer window of time to get calcium into the fruit. But these are the data, and this is what we saw with the treatments that we utilized. And then lastly, for this part of the presentation, I just want to show that we also measured soil calcium levels. We collected soil samples at the same time we were collecting our leaf tissue samples. So again, no statistical difference, but in the Wake Haven trial in 2023, we did see 14 to 25% greater calcium with our gypsum treatment. So some of our takeaways from this trial and where we stand right now is our fertilizer treatments had no effect on yield, no effect on fruit quality. And I didn't present that data because again, it wasn't really exciting. So you'll just have to take my word. We didn't see any difference in sugars, acids, firmness levels. And then our tissue nutrient status wasn't different as well. Moving calcium to the receptacle is the barrier that I think we really need to work to overcome. And I suggested some ideas where we could utilize some PGRs, and that shows promise in tree fruit systems as well as grape systems, and trying to keep the xylem and keep that plumbing more functional longer so we can move calcium into the fruits. But again, the takeaway is our current calcium fertilizer programs have negligible to no impacts on yield and fruit quality as long as plants are within their sufficiency standards. So, going back and leading into the next part of the presentation, these sufficiency standards are really important to inform your fertilizer management program. So if you're already within your sufficiency standards for calcium, I don't really think it's worth your effort based on the available data to apply additional calcium. But of course, if you're low in your sufficiency standards for calcium, then you certainly want to start thinking about applying. So I'll take questions in a little bit, but I wanted to give some highlights on the other project that we started in 2024. And this project is looking at leaf tissue sufficiency standards for Washington grown red raspberry. So a little bit of background on this. A lot of us know that leaf tissue sufficiency standards are really helpful and used in conjunction with sampling, as well as tissue nutrient assessments to help guide fertilizer management programs and give us some data to inform what we're going to be applying within our fields. The published sufficiency standards that we have, however, they're coming from data collected in Oregon, as well as some parts of northeastern United States. So we don't really have data relevant for our cultivars and our unique growing conditions. And so our goal was to look at some of the newer, higher vigor machine harvestable raspberry cultivars in northwestern Washington and start to understand what might be the sufficiency standards for our industry. So that brings us to the objectives. So first objective was to determine leaf macro and micronutrient sufficiency standards for some of our traditional as well as our new floricane fruiting raspberry cultivars in Whatcom County. And then the second objective was what I'm doing right now, disseminate findings to stakeholders and then develop nutrient guidelines and sufficiency standards for this region. So for this project, we also did all of our work here in Whatcom County. We collected recent fully expanded primocane leaves, and we sampled every 2 weeks from about mid-June through mid to late September of 2024. Within each field, we had 4 rows or transects where we collected leaves on either side of the row. And the cultivars that we used were Meeker, Wakefield, Wake Haven, and Colshan. And there were 3 fields per cultivar, so 12 fields total. It was a massive sampling effort, but a lot of fun. I was even able to convince my daughter to help me sample. So that's her. And I told her I'd give her ice cream if she helped me sample, and that worked like a charm. So after we collected all these leaves, they were dried. We had 336 samples total, and we sent them to Brookside Labs for macro and micronutrient analyses. So I guess, again, I just got these data fairly recently, so it might be a little rocky as we kind of walk through this, but I wanted to highlight just what we're seeing for some of the key nutrients or nutrients that I find particularly interesting and what you might find interesting as well. So I'm definitely interested in nitrogen. We're going to look at the results for nitrogen first. The way that these figures are set up, we have our nutrient on our y-axis, and then on our x-axis our various sample timings. And then the different colors represent the different cultivars that we were sampling. And then you'll see here, I put a green box, and the green box represents the Oregon State University sufficiency standards for a given nutrient. So you'll see here in this case for nitrogen, the Oregon State University sufficiency standard is 2 to 3% for leaves collected in late July through early August. So you see here, this box here, our plants are kind of hovering at the top there. For me, it leads to the indication that our sufficiency standards should be a bit higher for Northwestern Washington relative to Oregon. And I was hypothesizing that would be the case given these are higher, bigger plantings as well. Now for phosphorus, so we have percent phosphorus again on our y-axis, our different sampling times for our different cultivars. And the Oregon State sufficiency standards is 0.2 to 0.4% for leaves, again, collected between late July to early August. So here, the takeaway that I got from this first year of data for phosphorus is that the range is acceptable, but I think we can lower that upper range to kind of avoid giving people the sense that they need to be targeting up to 0.4%. Because all these seals were relatively productive and commercially representative for our area. Next is potassium. So again, potassium on the y-axis are different sampling times for our different cultivars. And the Oregon State University sufficiency standards indicates that healthy, productive leaves should be 1 to 1.8%. So you can see in our case, we hardly ever got there within the recommended sampling timing. So potassium is a nice nutrient where my recommendation is likely going to be with another year of data that we need to elevate the sufficiency range for potassium for our cultivars within our production region. 2 more nutrients I'm going to go through. We have calcium. We just heard about calcium. Calcium, you'll see here, the sufficiency range is 0.6 to 1.5% for leaves, again, collected in that late July, early August timeframe. And you'll see, the arrow points up because we never really got to that 1.5% level. So the data indicates again that the upper threshold might be lowered. So maybe a potential good guideline for us for calcium leaf tissue concentration should be 0.5 to 1%. And lastly, boron. Boron is another really important and interesting nutrient, often deficient in our production systems because it's one of those nutrients that washes away with our abundant rainfall. And so here, the Oregon State University sufficiency standards indicates 30 to 80 ppm for leaves, again, collected within that sampling window. And it jumps around quite a bit. We did try to find fields where they weren't applying foliar micronutrients, but that was just too hard of an ask for some of our grower cooperators. So it might be fluctuating based on foliar fertilizer applications, with boron included. But the takeaway so far from this is that boron looks like the sufficiency range coming out of Oregon is adequate. So some of our conclusions and takeaways from all of this work. First, calcium movement to fruits. It's really difficult for a lot of fruits. It's really difficult for raspberry. And again, our standard fertilizer practices that we study don't really overcome this limitation. But again, I think there's some opportunities we can look at some PGRs to try to overcome this and get calcium into our fruits and see what effect it might have on fruit quality, as well as some of our other important metrics. And then some of these early results indicate that the Washington raspberry industry should have its own unique leaf tissue nutrient sufficiency standards. And also, I didn't highlight this, but I think based on overall the data and when we're starting to see periods of stability in these nutrients, that we can extend our sampling period later to maybe mid-August. And then leaf nutrient sufficiency standards, our goal is to repeat this project in 2025 and then come up with these guidelines at the end of 2025, 2026. But I think it's really important we get another year of data because there can be year-to-year variation with these types of data. So with that, I want to acknowledge that funding for this project was provided by the Washington Red Raspberry Commission. We also had some funding from the Northwest Center for Small Fruits Research that supported our calcium work. Raider Farms was a huge partner and a collaborator in the calcium research, hugely instrumental for our success. And then for the tissue nutrient project, I'm leaving out the names of the growers anonymous, but again, thanks to those grower cooperators for letting us come to their fields and collect data. And then my lab, because it's again, 12 fields, sampling every couple of weeks. It's a big effort. So I wanted to thank the lab for all of their help as well. So with that, I want to thank you all for your attention and open it up for questions if there are any.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. I think we have a question.
On the calcium, by chance you look at base saturation?
Yeah, so the question was, did we look at base saturation? We do have that data. I got it yesterday, so I don't have it analyzed. So just kind of the nature of the timing of the work, but I'm happy to follow up with you, as well as the grower cooperators, as we kind of polish the raw data from the labs.
Can you elaborate on the PGR?
Oh, yeah,
Riley.
Riley?
What you called it?
Yes, so yeah, I'm happy to elaborate on PGR. So PGR just stands for plant growth regulators. And there's some data from apple and grape that auxins and gibberellins can help maintain the functionality of the xylem. That's really critical for moving calcium around in the plant and into the fruit. So, we might be doing some trials this year, kind of some side experiments on our own where we're applying these particular plant growth regulators and seeing how it affects movement of water as well as calcium into the raspberry fruit and receptacle. Yeah, but I'm always love feedback from growers and other members of the industry because I'm an academic and I can be a little pie in the hot sky sometimes. So it's always helpful to be brought back down to earth. I think there was one more question back there.
Two questions. For your calcium research, were those 3 varieties in 3 different fields with 3 potentially different background fertilities, or were they all in one similar field soil type?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for the calcium study, those fields, well, Meeker was the same, and then Colshan and Wakefield were all in different fields, but they were all managed by the same grower cooperator.
And then for your leaf tissue analysis, were all those fields just fertilized with a grower standard fertility program and average yields, or were they fertilized for high yields to try to see how much mass accumulation you can get?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the fields that we selected fields that are representative of the industry. So in that case, typically they're trending on being on the higher end of yield production per unit area within this county. So I hope that answers your question there. If I might have forgotten a part of it. Did I get it all? Yes. Correct. So these are all grower standard fields. We had a couple of fields that, when we set up like Wake Haven, for example, that field was turned over the fall this year because it was starting to not be as productive. But our goal in site selection and for the bulk of the fields are grower standard practices overall. And they represent, grower cooperators in this region that are trending or hitting on the higher end of the yield production spectrum per unit area. Good question.
Do we have one more question here?
Oh, I think there's
was
one
covered.
more over there.
Coming back.
Fertilizer rates, I mean, total nitrogen applied or potassium applied, was there correlation between some of the numbers?
That's a great question. Again, we don't have that data analyzed. This is just hot off the press. So we don't have that, but it's definitely a question that I have in my mind to see. But yeah, good question. Stay tuned. How about that for an answer? Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa. Okay, well, that wraps us up for this room for this year of the Washington Small Fruit Conference. Thank you all so much for all your attention. We really appreciate it. Yeah, I think that's everything. I think there is one more pesticide credit available in the other room in the session after this. So if you're still looking, head over there around, I think, 3:30. Thanks again.